So we are talking about some anxiety today. Is that right?
Yes, anxiety specifically around your family gatherings. I don't know if anyone listening maybe gets a little triggered around their family. Is a little stirred, feels like they're walking on eggshells the second they walk into the parents' house with all of these people that you're supposed to, like theoretically, love being around, but then you feel like you're really forced into this room full of people you don't really necessarily want to be around. But if you're not there, you're a terrible person.
Now, there's people out there right now that there's a couple of them, but there's people out there who are thinking, I don't have anybody in my family like that. There's nobody in there who's triggering me. And if you're thinking that, it's you. This is a public service announcement. You're the one doing it to everybody. Now, I'm just joking.
Today is the day to increase your self-awareness.
It does seem like that. It does seem that there is that. We talked about it, and I believe that the devil loves to bring division in places where there's supposed to be unity and love and care. And so it does seem like whenever you're around your family that there can be some of that, which is just it's an odd deal when you really process it. Why do you think that is?
I don't. Well, I would say we have so much. No one can hurt us like our family. You know what I mean? And then you think about, especially as you age, you have sometimes decades of hurt that you've experienced from these people, right? That you do love. It's part of why we continue to gather with them. And I would just say like that stuff just sits in us sometimes, And so when you come back around those people, maybe you haven't been around them all year and now all of a sudden you're around them often, all that stuff just feels like it gets stirred back up.
Yeah. And I want to encourage you, even if maybe you don't have a bunch of family or those gatherings, there are places and people that we go around that it does trigger some of that relational or social anxiety. And we really believe that part of your purpose, biblically, this isn't our opinion, biblically, part of your purpose is to be a peacemaker. As you win your world, that is part of what you do.
Well, I was laughing. I was talking to a friend of mine and I asked her, because she really does. She struggles with some people.
The friend that came over today?
Yes.
We got a Ring doorbell. And when Rachel's people come over, I can never get to my phone in time to yell at them. I want to yell at her so bad before she gets inside one time, but I always miss her.
She calls herself my liberal friend.
Yeah. I know.
She loves that. She loves that I call her that.
I know. So. Well, that's why I was going to yell something about that at her. But
she would receive every bit of it. Anyway, we were talking about, though, she was saying how it's difficult for her because as a Christ follower, she knows, like she's super convicted by the Holy Spirit to love these people and be kind. And on the flip side, she's like, literally like, I can't even with these people.
Yeah.
So I know she's not the only one that feels that way. And if you're listening, you say, I feel that way. One of the things that I'm so grateful for is that we serve a God that gives us the gift of peace and rest and joy, even when we're in these situations that make us feel overwhelmed or we feel stirred.
Yeah.
You don't have to live in that.
So to say it differently, time with family or with people, really no matter who they are, it doesn't have to be an anxious experience. You don't have to be self-conscious or stressed the whole time. There can be not just peace, but purpose in those
Absolutely.
in those times and conversations. So what, just to bring more, maybe to help some more people resonate, what would you say would be the definition of that anxiety or whatever? How would you define that?
That anxiety is just the fear of the future. And so if you say, hey, I'm just afraid of what is going to happen. And I think that is for us when we walk into those situations, we have this history that we've experienced. And so we have two things that are conflicting. One is we have these unrealistic expectations sometimes that there would be something different that would happen when nothing else has changed. But we just have this expectation that people will behave differently. One, and that they won't, or that we're going to experience the same pain all over again.
Right.
And so when I think for us, like walking through, hey, how do we prepare our heart then for being with our family? So what are some things that we do before we go into, well, let me even back it up. Before we even decide, because I think this becomes an argument, in people's homes. When you have, especially when you have multiple families involved. That's what I mean, like you're getting involved when you have step parents and like if both your parents are divorced and then they both have to, so you have like 4 sets of families you're supposed to go and be able to love on and see. And if you don't, then you're, a terrible son or daughter and you feel guilty. And how do we decide where we go for gatherings?
Yeah, well, I think, I learned this from Pastor Craig Rochelle, who has an unbelievable podcast. If you're not listening to the Craig Rochelle Leadership Podcast, you need to be a part of that. But he talks about something called the power of pre-decision. And so whenever you make, you should look it up. I don't know what number the podcast is, but the power of pre-decision, it impacts like your nutrition, your relationships, your time, your disciplines, like the power of pre-decision. So here's an example that'll maybe be potentially controversial. Whenever I was growing up and Dad taught me to drive, he said, if something runs in the road, you never swerve. You never swerve. And so like if a dog comes in the road and you're going around a corner, you never swerve. If you swerve, you have the potential to go off the side of the road, hit a tree, or worse, go in the other side and get a head-on collision, maybe kill a person, which some people in the podcast may think it'd be more humane to, save the dog. I don't know. But I remember when we first got married and I was riding with you and you swerved, and I remember I was like, what are you doing? Like being like offended that you swerved. But for me in the moment, because Dad had taught me that, like I have the power in those moments of like crazy snap second decisions, this power of pre-decision where I'm not going to swerve. I'm actually going to grip the steering wheel as hard as I can. I'm not going to I may put my brakes on, but I'm not going to swerve. So going back to,
because you had already decided what you would do if that happened.
The pre-decision. Yeah. And so, but going to something obviously a little more emotionally impactful, we have pre-decision before the moment. So the week of Thanksgiving, it's emotionally charged. It just is. Like people are off work, you have more free time, and there's all this, which is
your rhythm is disrupted.
Annoys the mess out of me that there's all this pressure on it to be a certain thing. But we make a pre-decision on where we're going to go before, like all this stuff. So like we have a rotation that we do, like for Christmas and for Thanksgiving and all that kind of stuff. Our family knows, our parent or our kid knows, like out in advance. It's not like how we feel or, hey, are you not coming because you're mad at me or whatever? No, we decided, actually years ago, and we just still do this rotation. And so that's what I would say when we're deciding where we're going. I would also, again, I encourage you the power of pre-decision for a bunch of things, but even relational things. It may feel cold, but it really
and we're
isn't.
A little late now because we're coming into Thanksgiving already. So, but even if you already know, you don't have to wait until Tuesday before Thanksgiving to say something like, hey, you got 2 weeks.
Yeah.
So you can call and have a conversation today and say, hey, I just want you to know I love you so much. We've looked at what we can do. Like this is what we can do this year that's best for our family or that honors whatever. And you can share as much depending on the relationship with your family, what you share. But you can have that conversation right now.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to keep in mind, because if you have a strong why, like you can do anything. You can do anything. So like obviously, like it would keep me up at night if I ran over a dog. But like my why of not like, if I were to cross the double line and hit like a mom and her kids, I'll again, maybe sounds terrible, but I'll run the dog over. And so like whenever you make that pre-decision, but also keep your why. And so like, I want to make sure that you feel valued. So I'll tell my mom, who I love desperately, I'll tell your mom, who I love so much, hey, we're not coming, or we're not doing this, we're not doing that, because my number one deal is I want to value you and I want to value our family. I love both of our moms and our dads, kind of. Obviously, our moms more. But like I love them. So I think like deciding as a family, hey, what's our highest value? Now, roll the clock over. If one of our parents were, hey, this is like maybe their last Thanksgiving, then you and I are going to have a discussion, hey, we need to
absolutely
change our priority to, hey, let's make this, let's even tell the other parents, hey, we're going to celebrate Thanksgiving with you next weekend.
And these were conversations that we've practiced for like years. We got better at it.
And if you, it seems terrible if I tell a story about our first Thanksgiving.
I'll tell you about our first Thanksgiving.
And the reason I tell you that is because
I'll give you the deets. I'll spill the tea.
Spill the tea. The reason is because I think when the conversations don't go easy, a lot of times when things don't go easy, we feel like they didn't go right. But that's not the case.
Yeah, sure. And so I'll tell you, our first married Thanksgiving,
we were in our robust 800 square foot apartment.
1-bedroom apartment, and we were not pregnant yet. That was to come. And that was the next
We never got
shocker.
pregnant. You got pregnant. I looked like I was pregnant with a food baby.
You put on some weight.
Lots of Whoppers.
Anyway, it wasn't our grandest season in life. Anyway, we're in the kitchen and we're talking about I'm cooking chicken, or you were cooking chicken. One of us was cooking chicken.
I don't know.
And we're trying to talk about Thanksgiving, and I am a passionate person, and I start to raise my voice. Now, I'm not screaming, but I am raised. I have elevated my voice, and I'm speaking with quite a bit of frustration. And Zach looks at me and says, if you're not mature enough to have this conversation without yelling, then we can't have it, and walks out of the room.
It sounds so bad when you say it.
Yeah, it was terrible. That's not how you do it.
When we say walk out of the room, I was like 4 feet away.
You turned around and left.
Yeah.
He left.
Yeah.
And I was in the kitchen. I had to finish cooking the chicken for you, by the way. Oh, I was so mad. And he was right. I should not have. It wasn't the healthy way to communicate. It didn't honor him, but I didn't have the words to articulate how I felt, everything that I was feeling. And so I needed to slow down so I could say, hey, I'm sorry. I should not have
But I
raised
think
my voice.
this is a great opportunity for us to be vulnerable. So I think you were in the wrong, being elevated and
I should not have yelled and put that in air quotes. I was not yelling.
I was in the wrong by belittling how you felt and almost being dismissive. Now, I think a lot of men will just submit whatever because they don't want to deal with it. I wasn't going to do that because I'm too prideful to do that. But I wasn't going to do that. But either way, both of those lead to resentment, which creates division and all that kind of stuff. So, I think that we were both in the wrong. I didn't have the words, just like you said a second ago. Mm-hmm. You didn't have the words. I didn't have the words to say, hey, I don't care about where we go for Thanksgiving. I just want to be happy with you.
Right.
So so either way, I don't need to get into our family stuff, but going back and discussing that later was really helpful because it's not that we don't get into those same situations again, but something that my dad taught us, I think is so helpful. He says that experience isn't the best teacher. Learned on experience is. And so maybe you've been with your family or, whatever it might be for
reflected upon experience.
Yeah, for 20 years. And you're like, oh, I know about this. Well, have you sat down post holidays or post stress situation and say, hey, that didn't feel good, did it? And so just like when we had one of our first big traumatic things when we had our first miscarriage and we didn't handle that right together. Mm-hmm. And then we realized, gosh, we're starting to not like each other because of this. Why is that? And then when we reflected on that experience, that's when we grew. And that's whenever it doesn't really matter what happens now because we've reflected on it, which maybe we can talk about some of that to help. So,
well, we make a decision together. First of all, when it comes to the holidays, I think that's one of the things we do to prepare our heart and to get ready is we make a decision, a pre-decision, which helps us dramatically. Mm-hmm. And we put everything on the table to do that. So, hey, here's all of the stressors, here's all the things. And then we pull back, especially if you're a parent, hey, your primary family, is your husband and your children or your wife and your children, and that's it. So that's where we start, hey, what are our values? And this is how we make decisions. We make decisions based out of those first. Right. And so then when we think about, hey, okay, how do I prepare my heart to be around people who are, a lot of us have lost family members and they maybe don't communicate the same way you do in your home, or they live a different life, and you say, hey, like they're going to say stuff that's going to offend me, which I think if you struggle with that, first of all, go back and listen to one of the last 2 weeks podcast was about a little bit about offense, but then he taught an incredible message on offense in October. And that was out of this world. It was during Traps and Trolls. It was incredible at faithpromise.org. It was just so good. That would be really helpful. But I make some decisions ahead of time. Hey, like I am not going to receive offense over what people say here. Like this, I'm just going to be unmovable, my heart and my mind. I'm going to be so sure on my security and my identity in Christ that anything you say that's contrary to the word, which we talked about this in spiritual warfare, that everything that's contrary to what God says has to submit to the word, has to submit to the blood of Christ. Yeah. And so anything that's going to be said to me that is contrary to that identity and what God's doing in me, I'm just not going to receive it.
Yeah, and I think you have to help each other. So like if you're not married, you need to invite somebody in this position. But if you're married, whenever it talks about the and it's for real, like talk about this with your spouse or a friend. But when it talks about the armor of God in Ephesians, all of it's on the front. The breastplate of righteousness, like it's all on the front, shield. And so we really go into those situations back to back. So like whenever, because we make these decisions, but people still annoy us or whatever. And giving somebody permission, you have to give somebody permission to walk up to you and whisper, "Hey, you're missing it."
Take a deep breath.
Yeah. So like, and Rachel and I both do that. Like we'll both be in a spot where we've been triggered about something, and the other one has to be able to walk up and say, "Hey, you're." So if I give it an example, I forgot what had happened. Something happened, and Rachel's in the other room. This is Christmas, and she's in the other room. Whatever. I don't know if I texted you or I called you, but I was like, "Hey, you're missing what you care most about by not being in here."
Yeah.
And then. Because for me, I'm not necessarily going to isolate. I'm just going to be mad. I'll still stay in there. I'll just be mad, which one's not better than the other. But I just remember, but giving somebody permission. An example, if you ever want to eat healthy and you ask somebody to help you, it's just, but that is annoying. Like I don't have as good of genetics as Rachel. So if I don't eat healthy, I'll get a snowman body immediately. And so sometimes she'll ask, "Hey, are you sure you want to eat that?" And every single time I'm filled with just rage over it. I hate it so much, but you have to give somebody permission to be able to do that. And so I think that's one way to not take offense. But hey, something else that you and I have done is, and I remember the first time we had this conversation, you and I were taking a walk actually at one of our campuses. We were walking, and somebody close to you, they just eating you up with comments and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I was like, "Hey, I don't know that voice should get that much power in your life."
Yeah.
I think that would really impact offense if people walked in having a right mindset on, where these comments, not in like a belittling way, right? But sometimes we let some of these comments go like right to the core of who we are, and that person shouldn't really get that kind of, for lack of a better term, authority in your life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Well, blood relation does not supersede what God's instructed us to and what he says about us and who we should give authority to speak into our life. Wise counsel that we should have. Like we should have people who do speak into our life and have permission to sharpen us. But just because someone is related to you does not automatically earn them that position. And that is really hard for a lot of people, because family is a beautiful thing that God created, and we want to honor that and bless it. And also, there's still such a thing as sin. And there are people in our family that are not walking filled by the Spirit. And so we have to be intentional to, just because they are your family does not mean that they have authority to speak into who you are and the decisions that you're making.
Yeah, we talk at Faith Promise, we don't say it as much as we used to, but talk about the one shot principle. Like when somebody comes to church, they could be coming just the one time. And so they have to have just the best experience that we can offer, from guest services to parking to sound to message, like all the things, right? And I really do think about, for a lot of us, if you have friends or family that are lost or away from the Lord, if you're going to sit at a table with them or in the house with them 3 or 4 times a year, I mean, it's the one shot principle, you know? So like, and it's just hard not to walk in and get triggered right away, but would that not be a ploy of the enemy to get us to not think about eternity and not, if God's done a miracle in your life this year, not to bring that up because you're annoyed, or if God's given you a revelation recently, or you've experienced freedom, but we'll forget that stuff if we're operating in offense, if we're operating in annoyance, or even if we're so guarded. Jesus didn't guard himself. It's just not what he did. So, and
that's a hard thing to grapple with. He was the King of Kings, Lord of Lords, and he apparently had no boundaries.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great. And this next part could be a little contentious potentially, and I'm going to ask you to rein it in over there.
We'll see.
But should you prepare your kids for being around like different lifestyles and things like that? And so let me give you a scenario, because whenever you hear that and it's like, everybody's got like probably a knee jerk, but a great.
Yeah. Should I protect my kids from being around my family because they live differently?
Because here's a great type of conversation, that it's one of the kind of the scenarios that people are bringing up to have the conversation. If let's just say you're a Christian with pretty traditional biblical values, right? Which we do, we stand on. If you got invited to a same-sex wedding, would you go? That's been a big topic of discussion, and people that I respect land on both sides, all that kind of stuff. But I just want to bring up something that polarizing, because whenever you bring your kids into your homes, now it's going to get more and more prevalent, where not just your family members, but also the people you're inviting in. We invite people into Thanksgiving from the church that don't have places to go just because their family's not around. But I really do pray that we get to a place where we invite people who are living pretty far from God into those moments so that they can experience what family is like.
And so you have people who are going to have experienced or are walking in addiction, or all kinds of different things that your kids could be exposed to. And I think that what would you say, what would be your response to that?
So I would say we don't protect our kids, we prepare our kids. And so you can't protect your kids, right? I mean, at some level, they're getting it. At some level, they're going to hear it. So do you want to protect them or do you want to prepare them, right? So like if do you want to fight all their battles or do you want to prepare them to fight? They have to fight, whether it's spiritually or relationally or all those kind of things. And so we want to prepare them. And so, and again, obviously appropriately, but Rachel, the other night, Rachel did something and one of the boys said something, and I said, "Do you want me to spank your mom?" And they're like, "Yeah." And I'll spank her after you go to sleep. And obviously a joke for Rachel and I. And JL, who's 9, goes, "Are you talking about sex?" And I was, "Oh." And I look at Rachel, and I'm like, "What in the world? If you can't spell well, I spelled sex." It's my 9-year-old, and I'm like, "What?" And I'm like, "How do you know what that is?" And she's like, "Well, me and mommy talked about it." And so
a while ago, I actually can't believe it took this long to surface at the
bring
dinner
up
table.
like that. But
and I love that. First of all, we have a home where you could bring it up at the dinner table.
And we talk about the power of the principle of the first.
Yeah.
Be able to write the narrative that sex isn't something dirty or fearful or shameful.
Yeah.
But it's a gift. And so long story short, and we can go a bunch of different ways with it, but I think the same thing we're doing for each other. Like whenever we go in, like we're not I'm not trying to protect you from something somebody may say. I'm trying to prepare you because protection has kind of a defensive. There's not an area where we need to be defensive as God's kids.
Yeah, I think one way, like this is a super practical example. River we were with some people who just choose to use different language than we do. And he asked me, hey, what does that word mean? And so I told him, hey, that word is not a life-giving word that we choose to use. And I said, do you hear mom and dad say that word? And he says, no. And I said, okay, so other people choose to use that word, but in our home, we are not going to use that word. And it was not like it wasn't this big deal, like they're the worst person because they said that. But right now, mom and dad help get to decide what words we use, and we're not going to use that word.
Yeah. And that's something big. And I would encourage, I'm sure we've done podcasts on in the past, the brilliant people who put this together will be happy to put a link in the show notes. But we've talked about values. And so we have very specific values at our church at Faith Promise. We have 4 values: love God, love people, discover purpose, and win your world. But those were the values of our home before they were the values of our church.
Yeah.
And so like hey, mom, why can't we watch that? Or hey, dad, why can't we say that? Or hey, why don't we do that? Or why do we do this? Well, we do that because that does, and they'll even ask, does that show align with our values? Right. And so like building this foundation of, that's why we do, or why we're not going to take this trip because we're giving generously in Heart for the Harvest, or we're not going to do this or that. Well, why is that? Well, part of our values, we love God, we put Him first, and this helps us win our world. And so, but having and that goes back to the power of pre-decision, which I think is really significant for this. So, hey, let's go through.
Can we just say one more thing about your kids? Like God intentionally created your children for this time. So you do not have to be afraid about what they're going to see or they're going to be with you while you're with your family or while you're at these gatherings. And so you'll be able to discern in the moment, hey, we've reached a place it's no longer appropriate for my child to be present, and I'm going to remove my child from this situation. I know some of us have families that it is like, after 7:00, people have been drinking for a while and stuff starts to get crazy and loud and angry. And
people partying at Thanksgiving?
People are partying.
Nice.
And so we just want to make sure like, hey, you can say, hey, we're going to go. And that is going to lead to some conversations that obviously child-sized truths, but there are just some things that our kids need to know and see. Like the world is broken and sin, it brings death. And we can teach our children that the consequences of sin will destroy us. And Jesus came that we would have life and life to the full, a life of holiness. And this is what when we choose to do things God's way, we don't experience all of this yuck that comes from sin because God's way is the best way.
Yeah.
So don't be we don't have to be afraid. We obviously make wise choices. I want to give you just a couple of practical things.
Before we do that, I just got to tell you, do not use preparing your spouse, kids, friends, whatever, as an opportunity for gossip. There's a difference between preparing them for what they may hear and telling them that Uncle Micah is a steaming pile of cow poop. We do talk about that, there's a difference between gossip and preparation, and your kids know it. They'll know, and so I just want to encourage you for that, because people get their view of situations and others by how we prepare them. And so if your kids are anxious about going somewhere or dreading it or whatever, why is that? What have we prepared them for?
Yeah.
And so it's not preparation for family time. Also, it's not time for gossip. But yeah, so let's walk through it. But we'll go back and forth. But let's give some tips on how to just live in peace through this season.
So I would first, if it were me, I would have some scripture I have memorized. Make sure that you've memorized scripture. One of them for me that I use all the time because I get frustrated is if possible, so far as it depends on you, be at peace with all men. That's Romans 12:18. So like I always, sometimes when I'm frustrated, and so this is why I have that scripture is because one of the things you've got to make a decision about is you're not going to take negative comments to heart. And so what I'll do is I'll say, as it be with me, I got be at peace with all men, be at peace with all men, be at peace with all men. Like sometimes I'll repeat that scripture over and over. And so whatever it is that hey, history has shown that these are the things that might get commented on, whether it's your faith or where you live or your relational status, you can pull back and say whatever scripture is going to be the most influential for you in that moment.
Yeah. I'd also say, hey, don't agonize over it pre or post event. And hey, here's a great indicator. How do I know if I'm agonizing over it? And we've all done it. But if you are living in the past, a past conversation, a past comment, or a potential conversation that might happen, you're agonizing over it. So God is the same God yesterday, today, and forever. But He doesn't ask us to live in yesterday, and He also doesn't ask us to live in tomorrow. And I think it's in James 3. It's James 3 or 4 that says today has enough challenge of its own. And so don't agonize over it. How do you know if you're agonizing over it? Are you practicing conversations? Are you thinking back to the last Thanksgiving and I wish I'd have said this and I hope I get to say this and I can't wait to bring this up? If that's the case, you're agonizing over or preparing to do offense and damage and not bring the kingdom.
Small talk does not have to be awkward. 100%. It's going to be a little bit, especially if you haven't seen people in a long time or you're meeting people.
Awkward. If you're awkward,
you might be, but it is good practice. So don't feel pressure to always know what to say. Just enjoy conversations that happen naturally. And if you have nothing to say, then you have nothing to say. Yeah. Sometimes maybe saying nothing is the better thing in the moment.
And I want to encourage something that we like to do, and we're not the best at it, but we like to talk about things that we, but also other people enjoy. And so maybe not go straight to, hey, how's work? Or how are the kids? But hey, what are you most excited about right now?
That's one of my favorite questions to ask people.
Yeah. What are you most excited about? Or because everybody asks hey, and this is, if you're looking to make friends, I'll give you a little cheat code on it. Everybody asks, hey, how are you doing? And almost everybody says good or great, right? Most people do. And then followed up with, hey, what's making you feel great? It's just human nature. Everybody likes to talk about themselves. And so going in there, asking people, just when people leave you, let them just feel like wind was blowing their sails. Well, and listen, don't wait to talk. Just, be there for them.
You'll learn something new about them. Maybe you didn't know before. And now you have this opportunity to speak life to and encourage and connect with this person. I would say too, when we're talking about helping other people talk about things that they enjoy, you too should talk about things you enjoy. Zach mentioned, hey, if you've had a miracle you've experienced or something exciting happen, even if you have people who like to one-up you or rain on your parade in your circle of your gathering, I encourage people to just talk about something that you like, whether it's your pet or a movie you just saw or your football team you enjoy, but don't be afraid to talk about things that bring you excitement.
Yeah. And hey, we'll wrap up with this one, but remember what Jesus said in Matthew 5. And Matthew 5 is one of Jesus' most famous sermons, the Sermon on the Mount. And this is really where Jesus is really turning religion on its head. He's saying, hey, adultery is not whenever you sleep with somebody who's not your spouse. It's whenever you look on a woman with lust. Hey, murder is not whenever you kill somebody. Murder is whenever you have hatred. So Jesus is like, he's reshaping how believers should live. And he says in Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called sons of God. And so there's a promise there that blessed are the peacemakers. And so I want to encourage you, no matter where you are, you could be a person in the offense or a person on the outside of the offense, but I pray that no matter where you are, that you are a peacemaker. You're breaking down fences. That you are bringing peace. That you are bringing union. You have to have a different voice when somebody brings gossip up to you. Can you believe they said that? Can you believe they did that? That kind of stuff just doesn't find a root in conversations with you. That for you, it's just, hey, how do I make my way to peace in this conversation? And you are going to look different, and you should, man of God, you should, woman of God. Matthew 6, Jesus said, when you pray the king, God's kingdom will come, His will be done on earth as in heaven. Yes, that even means at family gatherings. And so we cannot wait to hear stories about how you're winning your world, even during the holiday season. So God's going to do amazing things with you. We love you. We believe in you. Don't forget, your purpose is to win your world. We'll see you next week.